Games, board games. We might be talking about board games and Airecon, but I'm not gonna shout. I am starting off this morning, and if you would care to look during this little bit of singing, there's someone known as Mark Cooke. Mark Cooke made a show called Airecon. It was something that they happened upon. Well, it was an idea that came to their mind, and it was with all the friends that they could gather and find, and then they went to the house and had some fun and decided that this is something that should be multiple times done. Board games and Airecon, it's what we're talking about. Airecon, past and present and future, we're not gonna shout. Hello, good morning, good afternoon, good whatever it is, wherever you are. It is 10 a.m. UK time, which of course means that it's time for Busy Beats and Board Game Bladder. And today I've got a lovely person, someone who is doing so many different things, working for PSC Games, setting up a company with Bright Eye, like with other PSC people, doing all the Airecon stuff, and technically, even though you've not done any actual work for them, I hear you're on a 0 hours contract, but you're still technically on the books for a brewing company. But yeah, and this is all also as you're the parents of 2 small children, and you do take a good amount of care of them. So
yeah, I try. Yeah, put paper down, bit of sawdust. They're fine. Put a bowl out with some food in.
Just leave them to their own means, and like as long as you check on them, like every 6 hours, they're okay.
Yeah. Totally.
And hello, Vivan. It's lovely to see you. Someone that I actually met at Airecon. And let's start off with talking about how would you describe Airecon to someone who literally doesn't know what it is?
We would describe it as probably a festival of board games. We try and get a nice festival atmosphere, lots of fun, lots of people just enjoying games, I guess. And everywhere you go during Airecon, you'll see lots of stuff related to games. Some things probably tangentially, but I would say everything that you see is going to be something to do with games in some form or manner.
Yeah, like when you talk about the tangential stuff, there is definitely some arts and crafts stuff. There's definitely some arts and crafts stuff that you might be able to use within games, like dice cups or things like that. Or there might be some, places that sell somewhat geeky headgear or whatever, where it's more like, okay, this is something that you might want to do while you're gaming. And hello, Jess, it is lovely to see you. And Vivan says, I didn't get to speak to Mark at Airecon, but I wanted to thank you for organising an awesome event. My first convention, and I'm definitely going to be coming back every year.
Oh, that's good to hear. Thank you. Yeah, sorry I didn't get to chat. I don't get a lot of chatting time, unfortunately, these days.
So, if I were to describe Airecon for someone who doesn't know it, I would say, broadly speaking, there's one big convention in the UK. There's, which is the UK Games Expo. I think there's 4 kind of medium conventions. I would say there's Airecon, Tabletop Scotland, Tabletop Gaming Live, and Dragonmeet. And then there's a whole bunch of small to tiny conventions. And the interesting thing about these 4 medium ones, which as a person attending, are very similar in feel to the big one, because it doesn't matter whether you've got, once you're past 2,000 people, I think it doesn't really matter how high you go. Sure, there will be more floor to walk around and more things to see, but you already have all the people that you could want to play all the games you want with at that point.
Yeah,
but
definitely.
It's really fascinating how it has grown so quickly, not just your convention, but Tabletop Scotland and Tabletop Gaming Live, which is really exciting. Shows the whole board game thing as a whole growing. What do you make of that? And what do you make of that? Conventions as a whole?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's great. Obviously, I love conventions. I try to go to as many as my calendar will allow. Some I have to go to for work, for my day job, but if I can, I go to some for pleasure as well, because I love it. I love just being in a place where everybody is there for the, with a shared common interest. And I think it's great. And we know the hobby as a whole is growing. I believe it's one of the fastest growing hobby markets there is. So it makes sense that conventions would become more popular and would grow alongside that. And I think it's great that we have, these sort of more regional. I don't want to say local, because I would say probably the same for Tabletop Scotland, certainly for Airecon, possibly from Dragon Meet. I would say people generally will travel a couple of hours at least. Probably the vast majority of our attendees come from within a 2 hour kind of radius from around the convention centre. So I think it's certainly more regional than local. I think local, I would probably say you might be able to walk to it, or at least get some fairly easy public transport to it for it to be
Yeah,
local.
like if it's more than half an hour, certainly it's weird because London kind of skews your thing of what is local, but I would say if it's more than an hour, it's not really local. I mean, you could still be both within London, but not be local to each other.
Yeah, but I think that's really cool as well, just at all levels it's growing. Obviously, UK Games Expo, I think they said they'll probably be roughly the same as pre-pandemic levels, but they were on a massive upward trajectory, and certainly usually hovering around the third, fourth biggest in the world, and still growing. Like I said, these mid-sized ones we all actually probably 2 or 3 years ago.
I'm laughing at Vivan, who says, I consider anywhere within the UK to be local. We are a small country with good transport infrastructure. I mean, maybe, but like if you're down on the Land's End, or if you're up on John O'Groats, it's going to get to a fair bit of time to get down to London from the northern tips of Scotland or the Hebrides or whatever. Yeah, I get what you mean, Vivan. Like, compared to East Coast versus West Coast US, you don't actually need to take a plane, at least.
Yeah, so I think it's great that it's grown at all levels, because even sort of local game days, there seems to be almost at least 2 a month around me now that I could go to if I had the time. And even clubs, there's always like new clubs popping up, which I think is great. So I think at all levels, and I would say all of those, what we're sort of saying in mid-sized UK cons, probably 2 or 3 years ago had less than 1,000 people come in, and now I think we're probably all over 1,000. I think Tabletop Gaming Live probably didn't even exist then, did it? 3-4 years ago.
Yeah, that's the amazing thing, that so many of these things have blown up. Let's take a step back and talk about something completely different. Recent highlights, living life and seeing the sights. Recent highlights, playing games and other delights. Recent highlights. What is a day like in the life of Mark Cooke? What have you been up to in the past week? Yesterday, since I last streamed, which people might have seen me, I did do not much, to be honest. I did do a lot of social media stuff. I ended up footing around, maybe I should have been writing an RPG, which I need to finish the first draft of by the end of the month. So basically, I'm really hoping I can take some of tomorrow off. So if I want to do that, I better, get going with it today. So yeah, yesterday I was, to be honest, I ended up watching the film and just kind of doing lots of social media. But yeah, procrastination, it's a thing. Mark, hopefully you're a bit more organised and conscientious and good at getting stuff done than I am.
Yeah, I could do. Mine was going to be more of a leisure thing, I suppose. We went to a nice farm at the weekend,
lovely.
which was good. Went to fed some calves and various other animals. It was lovely, yeah.
That sounds wonderful. So it was the 4 of you and your family, and
a couple of other, another mum with her daughter as well. So 6 of us. All playing. It was all a bit random. Like there was just sort of random bits all over the place, like a random trampoline there, and then a bit of a play park thing there. But it was fun. It was like obviously a working farm, and they just started to try and make it more accessible to various families and stuff.
And hello, J Guards, lovely to see you, who says happy Tuesday. Happy Tuesday indeed to you and to you. So if we I sometimes like to ask questionably quick questions is the next section. It's not an interrogation, it's just a questionably quick question section. So if you have any questionably quick questions for Mark, then please fire them in and I might answer as well. Otherwise, I have been thinking about some possible convention ideas, and
Okay.
I know some of these might be a bit out there. Some of them might not be so good, and don't worry, I've not put a lot of thought into them, so I just want to hear your honest feedback.
Okay.
So, what would you think about StareCon, a convention where you're not allowed to blink? If you blink, you get ejected.
Oh, I think it would be quite empty quite quickly.
Hmm.
Yeah, it'd be quite a short. You'd maybe need to think about you're allowed to blink like once a day, maybe, or
Yeah, yeah.
something, just because you don't want people to come in and blink and then be sent straight out. Or maybe you only have to pay for how long you're in for. I don't know, I think that would be my,
Like it could turn in. So how do we need to tell people where conventions are? What if the location of a convention itself is a puzzle? This is a convention only for people who like solving puzzles. And if
I
they
think
want to know where it is, it's a different location each year. And you need to solve the puzzle online to get there.
that'd be really cool. Like, I think, especially if you maybe had a couple of days at the end. So the earlier you figured out the puzzle, the more time you had at the convention to do more puzzles. I think that could be really cool. Like, you get those big escape rooms that go over a whole city, something like that. And yeah, I think that'd be really good.
Yeah. And hello, Hal. It is lovely to see you. We're just talking through convention ideas. How about if everyone had to bring their own chair and then they talk about their chair while they're playing the game?
Yeah.
The convention doesn't need to pay for any chairs. How much money would you save? Just think of it.
I would imagine your insurance might go up quite a lot, though, because you can't guarantee the stability of the chairs. So, someone sat on someone else's chair, whose liability is that? These are the kind of things you have to think about.
Yeah, I mean, you've become, that it's good that we've got you to keep us grounded. I mean, it's how about a convention where the amount you're charged is equal to, like, there's a bit of hair trade going on. So you're allowed to do up other people's hair. Maybe they do up your hair. And then while you're sitting there, playing your games, you've got professional hairstylists to do your hair up.
I think that'd be fun. Yeah. Well, maybe not while you're playing the game, because you'd maybe have a whole section, which is like you can go here and get your hair.
So you're suggesting that it should be separate. Maybe this should not be combined with board gaming.
I think it can be combined. I would just worry the amount you probably move your head, looking at cards and looking around the board might not be great for a stylist. But maybe they could do theme it to the different games. So you go and say, I'm about to play this game. Can you make my hair themed for that game, please?
Well, what if you had a convention for bears? BearCon.
I think that's probably already a thing. It might not be called BearCon, but I would imagine it's probably already exists.
Okay, what if you had a BearCon where you weren't allowed to wear clothes?
I know that one exists. Well, no, I do. I would imagine it's probably, again, already a thing. Maybe it's not a convention, but I'm sure there's some events where you go to and not allowed to wear clothes. Louis III went to one, so there must be.
What about CareCon, where obviously you'd have to sort out some pandemic stuff, but everyone ends up, giving everyone hugs?
I think that's great. I think that should be just every convention anyway.
How about a convention where you dare people to do more and more ridiculous things?
Again, insurance would be probably my main concern there. But as long as everyone signed a waiver or something, why not?
Yeah, that's true. Like, you can get away with a lot with waivers. And, maybe everyone likes something a bit horror themed. Maybe everyone wants to get random surprises. You don't want a weak heart if you're at ScareCon, the game of chilling surprises.
Yeah. Again, I would imagine that's probably already a thing. Maybe not board game focused, but I imagine there's some kind of scare fest of some kind.
And yeah, Vivan has an actually more serious question, which we can maybe get into a wee bit right now, do you have any ideas for improving the experience for people who have come alone? I feel that a lot of board gamers are not super socially adept, and so coming alone can be a struggle to find games. I know there were flags and game finder system, but I felt like the online system was really hard to find and to navigate, and the real life game finder area became a cafeteria.
Yeah, I mean, we've always got ideas for improving things and making things better. It's kind of interesting. This one, there must have been something either to do with people not having been to a convention for a couple of years, or because we were just a bit busier than last time. Because we had all through Airecon, we had all of the same kind of things in place. The game finder system was there last time. We had the game finder area. Last time we had the Facebook group. We had the flags. Everything was the same. So, but we didn't get to hear these same things last time. So I don't know what it is in that 2 years. Maybe it's just because it's busier, so it was harder to see the flags, and therefore, and also it meant the cafeteria area was fuller. Yeah, I just don't know. But we're already looking at things. I've already spoken to Dave Weatherall about being more of a kind of ambassador-y kind of role. So we would make the game finder area a proper designated area, and he would be there every couple of hours just to, so anybody that was struggling can just go there and meet up with him, and he can try and pair people up. We're going to look at getting different flags, because some people said those ones are a bit hard to see because they were sort of black flags.
Yeah, like fluorescent yellow, or maybe fluorescent pink, or lime green, or orange. Those seem to be the four colours that really... You see them on high-vis vests?
Yeah, we'll have a look at that. I have seen a black high-vis vest once, which was kind of weird. It just had the fluorescent... It was black and had the fluorescent strips, but it was a black high-vis.
Okay.
And yeah, so we'll look at that. One of the problems we found, and it was the first time we were ordering the flags a few years ago, was it's really hard to get anything that's much bigger than that until you go to proper big flags. So there's like there's a gap in the flag market. If anyone wants to come up with one that's sort of that kind of size instead, that'd be good. We had really good success with the balloons. That was probably 3 or 4 years ago now. But the problem with that was helium is quite a limited resource, and it's needed in medical procedures. So we thought it's probably not a good idea, and it's so much waste as well at the end of convention, chucking away all these balloons because they're foil. You have to get foil balloons for them to work. So, and that just all has to go into normal waste. So we're going to look at other things. I have found where you just use air balloons and then they go on a stick that's about that big, and so we might look at something like that. But yeah, like I said, we're going to have that special area. We're going to look to do more with the game finder system. We've had feedback that the system itself is actually quite good and works well. The downside is the communication between people on it. So we're going to look into that and see if we can improve that. The issue we've had when we looked into it in the past is like GDPR and passing on people's details without their permission and things like that. It all gets a bit sketchy. So we're going to look to see whether we can build in some kind of messaging system where you get an email, but it's just sent from the system rather than the person.
I mean, as long as these things are things that you sign up for, and as long as the data is deleted afterwards. But Vivan says they spent 5 hours on Friday walking around trying to spot a flag. It does sound very frustrating. But despite that, they still had a good enough time that they'll be back. But they mentioned colour is more of an issue than size. And I think that, there is a reason why HandyCon is orange, and most places, UK Games Expo, Airecon as well, I think it's like a bright, garish yellow that you can see from across the room. I do like the volunteer helper role at UK Games Expo, where they're wearing these bright... Well, it's blue. As bright as you can get for blue. It's like a baby's bright sky blue, and then their job is just to wander around, make sure that everyone's okay. And I think that having someone there permanently stationed at the games library, not the person who's checking in and checking out the games, but having the person there to kind of see, okay, who's actually looking for people, and as soon as someone comes up, guiding them and just spending that couple of minutes with each person, I think you could probably get people into games fairly quickly, because if that is the number one complaint, I don't know, you are going to see all the survey results, but it seems to be the one thing that people are, oh, this could be even better, because that feels like the brilliant thing about Airecon. And let's take a step to talk about brilliant things, brilliant things. What's a little thing which is brilliant? Why is Airecon brilliant? Spend 30 seconds shouting out, well, not literally, extolling the virtues of your convention.
I think the main thing I think that is brilliant is it still has a real community feel, even though we were, not far off having 3,000 people there, about 2,700. I think it still felt very community, very friendly. Obviously, we're talking about difficulties that people have, but in general, the atmosphere I think is still very, very welcoming and friendly and inclusive, and I think that's what we think is brilliant about Airecon.
That's a lovely thing, and I would agree. I would say that it's really nice how there's a focus on just playing stuff, which does set it apart from all the other conventions that I've mentioned today. Tabletop Scotland is probably the closest. I would say that Tabletop Gaming Live is incredibly commercially driven, and I would say that Dragonmeet is nice for playing games, but there's a lot of an RPG focus, and Tabletop Scotland, it feels like, okay, this is a smaller version of UK Games Expo with the talks with a lot of traders and a fair bit of open gaming, but it does feel like Airecon has this unique vibe, and I think that as long as you communicate that, that's the key thing that allows you to keep the same vibe even as you grow up. Being able to communicate that. So if people aren't wanting that, then you don't get people who don't want that. You're very clearly, we are all about openness and accessibility, and I really appreciate having toilets made gender neutral back when there weren't any. There were signs saying, actually, this is a gender neutral toilet. This is not for one sex or the other, and make it so that people who are maybe struggling with that kind of decision, where it's a tiny thing that you need to think about each day, that's not something that you need to worry about. And obviously there's lifts, it's, you can go in even if you're rolling around on wheels, it's all good. And people aren't allowed to cycle or skateboard, but there are a few people on wheelchairs.
Yeah.
Vivan says, everyone I met was super nice once I got past the social anxiety of talking to strangers. So I thought it would be interesting to talk a tiny bit about let's have a whistle-stop tour of all the pictures on your website and talk about how it started. It's at your home. What facilitated this? What made you want to do this in your mind?
It was just because Jenny was going away on a hen do, and I thought for some reason I think I was bored at work, and I had arranged this gaming weekend with my friends, and thought it would be funny to turn it into a proper convention.
And so what did a proper convention mean to you? You had like these letters that you literally... Yeah. I don't know how you made these.
Well, you buy them from Hobbycraft.
Okay. And then people get to sign them, and they were still there for the first 3.
They're still there now, yeah.
No, I mean, you had letters that people could sign. People can no longer sign the letters. Yeah. Oh, you still have
not the big ones, not the big light ones. We have bigger ones than the ones in the picture, but it's like about that sort of size. That we have them near the library, and a load of pens that people can draw all over them still.
Oh, I totally missed that. Damn. Oh well. Anyway, carry on. What made this into a convention and not just a gathering of people?
So we had a program of events. I have the board with it on somewhere in here. I think it's probably behind the shelves. We had a sponsor. We had a name. We had a logo. Had an open gaming area. Yeah, and it was just good fun. We kind of ordered in some pizza. People brought cakes and did various other bits. And it was nice. Oh, there's Jen, and I was just playing with Jen Helena last night. Let's see. But yeah, the whole thing kind of, as you went around my flat, I put up posters, and I had done various things. And like I said, we had a schedule where we all sat down and watched the documentary like about Ludofact at one point, and did various things. We had like a speed game designing event that we all did together. Yeah, and so I had looked at how other conventions had been named. Obviously, UK Games Expo is fairly self-explanatory, but I came across on Gen Con. So the Gen is for Lake Geneva. So I was looking for bodies of water near my house, and I live in Aireborough and have the River Aire that goes not too far from here. And so I came up with Airecon, which obviously is also a bit of a pun. Well, I'm quite like puns. And so the line that goes through the middle of the Airecon logo is the River Aire, a bit like EastEnders. And the first logo I did for it says Airecon, it's cool. We didn't stick with that.
Yeah, I've said Airecon a couple of times on this show, and someone from Nova Scotia is saying, "Why are you talking? What is Airecon?" And they thought we were talking about air conditioning for like 1 minute. But no, the story of the river and everything is there on the website, and I'd encourage everyone to check it out. But Vivan asks, once you saw this is successful, we're going to run what is now known as Airecon 1 in Bradford, like at a place where you basically had access to because you were working for the church. And how did you handle all the logistics? What was your thoughts on scaling it up?
We hadn't really thought about scaling it up. We just thought we would have a go. So it was the charity we worked for. They let this room out you're seeing in the pictures. This was our kind of what we used for our staff meetings and stuff like that, but they let it out to a church on Sundays. So it's kind of an unusual convention the first couple of times because we had to run it Friday, Saturday. We couldn't do it the Sunday. Thankfully, because we had all of the because it was also used as a training space, so all the trestle tables were already there, so we were able to use those. So in those first couple of years, it was really like all the shelving that you see in there, we borrowed from Travelling Man. That's their convention shelvings. That's there. So Travelling Man were the first exhibitor we had in Airecon 1. And then they provided the library and stuff. And then there was yourself and Peter and the rock band. I can't remember what the game was called.
Oh, yes. I know the name of the person that's escaping me. And let me mute this. And then I can't remember how this came about. So I was like, hey, I'm really into going to conventions now. I really want to promote my stuff. And then I was like, oh, I can't remember how I floated the idea of Giant in a Bind. And he said, oh, I've got access to printing. If you do the artwork, I'll just reprint it all. And I came back from Essen. It was actually too much to do because I imagined Monday being like a rest day. But traveling all the way back from Germany to UK is not really a day of rest, to be honest.
It was actually it was Cannes. It wasn't Essen. You come back from Cannes because it was April, the first one. Oh no, sorry, you're right. You're right.
Airecon too.
Yeah. Sorry, yeah, you're right.
So October, I was not at your first public one. And here, I drew all the things on. I want to say Tuesday, Wednesday, and then Thursday I traveled over and I'd had these brand new 50-odd cards which I'd spent a while before writing out, and then there's like foot on a wall and foot on a knee, but there's also food on shoulder and in a bind on top of head, things that you could not do in a real setting. Which is actually quite funny.
There was one about putting on shirts and stuff as well, wasn't there?
Oh, socks.
Socks, yeah.
Free socks on a foot. And he asked, anyone got any socks? And then you say, please stop throwing your underwear. This is not a Holland Oates concert.
Yeah. And that's really good fun. I think it's because, I think we first got in touch through the first one we did. We'd signed up to the Jamie Stegmeyer's kind of play to win thing, and then you had sent us a few copies of In a Bind for this play to win thing, and it had been really popular.
For the first public one, okay.
Yeah, so for what is now Airecon 1. So I think that's how we first got in touch, and then we started talking about doing this big version. In terms of my day job, I used to do events organization. It was a very different kind of event, so I used to take big groups on holidays, which was nice. So I have some events management background and project management as well. So yeah, some of it is some of my day job, but
And
yeah.
it was Airecon, what's is now Airecon 2, end of 2016, when you were doing 2 year, and then you said, okay, we're going to do Airecon much bigger. You partnered with Travelling Man. They gave you the
Yep.
funding that you needed. It kind of like the UK Games Expo needed the funding to get out of the Clarendon suites, move into the Hilton, needed the funding to make that initial push. And since then, like, it's like you've never looked back. It's exploded in size thanks to the capacity of the venue. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. I mean, I think some of it, like with a lot of things, I think is just luck. And, you know, I'm sure if you talk about In a Bind, you know, it's a great game, and obviously we love it, but there's a little bit of luck there in that you were able to pitch it to Gigamik, and they pick it up, and Yogi, and then it becomes a phenomenal success. And if, you know, we speak to a lot of kind of big pop stars or actors or anybody, there always seems to just be kind of a little bit of luck somewhere along the way. And I think we were just lucky that we almost caught the wave at the right time, that, you know, we had done these couple of events, seen they were successful. We were lucky that the Travelling Man team were kind of up for getting involved and backing it, because they wanted to see an event up this way as well. Because really at the time, they're really in sort of scale, there was only Games Expo, and I think back then they were around the 10,000 mark. So I think we were just lucky in some ways, and that we just sort of tried to keep. We kind of very early on decided what our core principles were in terms of what kind of convention we wanted to run, and sort of stuck with that and just tried to scale it up. We did a lot. Ben and I did a lot of research, going around visiting various venues around Yorkshire, Leeds and Bradford mainly. And then as we'd spoken with Nabil at Travelling Man, he sort of said, oh, I'd always fancy doing an event at the Harrogate Convention Centre. So we went and looked at that and saw that it had space to grow into. It was obviously a huge financial jump, because I think we paid £100 for the church for those 2 days, whereas our first bill with Harrogate Convention Centre was something like £8,000 or £10,000. So it was a huge jump. And so I think it's just, you know, just been very fortunate that it's been something that people have enjoyed and want to keep coming back to, and we like doing it. And
it's interesting seeing these photos, because there's pretty much always at least a couple of people that I know in every photo. Of course, that's partially because I've been there since 2016 and I've gotten to make friends with some of these people. But yeah, I want to ask, how did you go about attracting the exhibitors, deciding who to pick, and also, what's your relationship with Ben and all the other people who are involved? How does that work, the division of labour?
Oh, right. Okay. So in terms of exhibitors, early on, we went to quite a lot of different conventions ourselves, so to promote Airecon. So we were already going to a few for fun anyway. So we went to Dragon Meet and we had a stand there, and we were trying to promote it to people, but we would also go around and speak to all the exhibitors and say, hey, we're trying to start up a new thing up north. Do you fancy coming? We did the same at Games Expo. We had a starter stand there with a little meeting space, but really it was more just of a little base, and we spent a lot of our time actually going up and down, just chatting to all the various exhibitors. At first, we just concentrated mainly on UK-based exhibitors, and kind of figured it's going to be a while before anyone wants to travel internationally. Just
makes sense.
The extra costs involved. So we just tried to be a bit clever about our time. It was usually Ben and I that would go, and we would divide up our kind of divide up the halls really, and say, well, you go and speak to these people, I'll go and speak to these people, and just skip these ones for now. Or sometimes we would say hi if we thought it was someone that maybe had an internet. So someone like Lucky Duck have people based in the UK, so that we would speak to Vince there.
And it's interesting because I was going to ask you at what point did you have to stop doing an outreach program, but of course the truth is that even UK Games Expo, they still have a stand at Essen as UK Games Expo. They're super big. I mean, not the biggest on a global scale, but still pretty gosh darn big. And
Yeah.
even they have to have stands and be reaching out to people to say, hey, have you thought about coming next year? And
Yeah.
it feels like you'll always have to do a wee bit of that, but presumably you're now getting to the point where any exhibitor who knows anything about board games who you would want at your events has probably at least heard of you. So they are probably already in a position to kind of reach out and investigate.
Yeah, hopefully. I think this year, unfortunately, was the first year we had to we couldn't get everyone in. We couldn't get a space for everyone that wanted the space. So that's the first year that's had to happen. Previous years we've been
Wow.
close, and then something's happened last minute where some spaces opened up and we've been able to fit people in. So we are looking at potentially trying to increase the space next year by moving into different halls still within the convention centre, but towards the other end. But I think, yeah, I don't know whether at some point we might have to look at some kind of application process or something where we actually have to select people, which is sad, but we have to balance these things up. So yeah, hopefully, I mean, I would imagine there's still always going to be, because I know Games Expo going to Essen is not all necessarily about them trying to convince people to come. It's a handy place for them to be, for international exhibitors to be able to ask their questions and feel more comfortable coming, I guess. So and so maybe there'll always be,
and it's a good like in terms of just sheer functionality. Like I go over, like, when was it? 2018 was, I want to, yeah, 2019 was the last year. No, yeah, 2019 was the last year at Essen, but 2018 would have been the last year I was at Essen, and then actually got to go to UK Games Expo. Sorry, the pandemic's kind of changed everything around. So, I would have been there on 2018, and then I said, oh, I want to have this sort of space, and they know me. I've been there since 2016, and same, like, I basically, once I had in a bind, to be honest, my basic marketing strategy was I want to go everywhere. This is a great game. I want to do all the legwork of getting everyone to play it and giving away potentially 100 copies to like all the exhibitors and seeing what they think of it and just like selling it, and hopefully people end up wanting to buy more copies for their friends. That was my marketing strategy. So I was very big on conventions, and so I think that has meant that a lot of people in the UK know who I am. But even for me, like, I could have that conversation online, but it's just a little bit easier to go down, sit down and say, okay, this is the space that I would like, point to it on the screen, and they say, okay, done. And then you get that instant response, and you book your little half-hour slot, which... And it is... Vivan says the balance of gaming area versus trade area was great. And there is a question, at some point, are traders going to be disappointed at, Airecon, if they come in and they just look at the raw numbers? With all due respect, Airecon, I would say, relative to the raw numbers, probably has the least amount of trade as an exhibitor compared to any other convention. And that's not a bad thing necessarily. It's just a thing to be aware of. That in terms of footfall, a lot of the people don't even go to the trade area at all. A lot of the people are going and playing games with their friends, and I think that's fantastic stuff. But it is something to be aware of when you're an exhibitor. So maybe you don't need quite as big a space as you need. I mean, as it happens, like there was one time, I think like maybe during Saturday afternoon, I had like 3 tables to play games on, and we had like 4 groups playing at one point, where one of the groups was like just me and like someone else popped in. I was, okay, we'll just kind of use this corner bits of a table that wasn't really arranged for that, but it was really nice having that amount. But we were working really super hard to, like, everyone who passes, you give them a sticker. Everyone who passes, you kind of invite them in. So many people, it's like they don't do anything, and that's kind of sad when you see the people sitting behind their stand and expecting people to just be enticed because they've got a game. Sorry, that is kind of a diss on other exhibitors. And so, yeah, if you're watching this, please try and stand in front of your thing and engage with people. But the thing is that I think that for some people, it might be maybe there's a size limit, or maybe you just say, hey, by the way, just so you know, you might want a slightly smaller space. Vivan says you could get to Hall D without even knowing that the trade area was there. And so, yeah,
It's possible.
it is. Do you want to have space for literally every exhibitor that applies, or do you want it to be a bit more selective, like Gen Con, where you actually have to apply?
Yeah, I mean, obviously there'd be somewhere between where we have enough space for everybody and everybody has a worthwhile event. I think it's tough. Like, you know, you sort of mentioning where some people have maybe designed a great game and they really enjoy it and want to share it, but maybe they just don't have those skills to do the sharing of it. And so what we're going to look at for next year is almost to do a little bit of a guide for some certainly first-time exhibitors to say, look, these are some of the things you can try not to put your table at the front and sit behind it because you're just creating a barrier. Try to be out in front of your stand and making sure that people know that you are part of that stand. And things, you know, just various hints. I think we were both at one of the days that Peter held with ITB, where there was kind of a load of this really good sharing stuff, and there was I think there was a story of Lawrence from Wotan who one time made his, he obviously has the huge bus at Games Expo, but he one time made his stand more like a corridor, so people were using it as a cut through, but while they were going, he was like, oh, while you're here, do you want to sit down and play this or play this? Like, he purposely left space for people.
The idea is that there was basically, it carried on a corridor which would have kind of been like a dead end, but then people could just carry on, and it was like, oh, wait a minute, now I'm in the middle of this stand. And Lawrence is really canny in those sorts of ways and really good at engaging. And Mark from Radical 8 Games with the Mask, I mean, they did a really good job of saying to people, hey, this is the game, this is the game. And good morning, Alex. It is lovely to see you. And Vivan puts forward a question about the Watch It Play team. So obviously it started off with Rodney Spiff coming along with, maybe this was before Watch It Played even had a team. So how did this collaboration come about? What does this collaboration entail in as much terms as you're willing to disclose? I don't know if you're willing to give the full financial details. That feels like possibly some of Rodney's business and your business. I don't know. But Vivan says, I came to Airecon because I knew it would be an opportunity to meet and play a game with my hero. Yeah. So how did this come about? And what are the details you're willing to share?
So it came about a little bit random in that we kind of thought it would be great to have Rodney at Airecon one day. And so I just put out a cheeky email saying to ask for the next event that we were doing, thinking at least this will just start the relationship. And at some point, maybe in the next 3 or 4 years, you might consider coming over. But the chat went really well. And then Rodney was like, yeah, I would love to come over. That sounds really good. And so he was just really up for it, really, that first year as a guest. He then came back the next year. But then the year, he then had his partnership with Board Game Geek for a little while, which meant that he had to go to Gamma. And that third year, for some reason, the timing of Gamma and Airecon meant that he couldn't do both. Like, usually Gamma is after Airecon, so you can some people fly straight from Airecon over to Gamma. But this one year it was the other way around, and would have meant he would have had to leave on like the Wednesday of Gamma to get there. So that was the year that we had some of the other team members, like Paula came over. We also had the brothers Murph and Mandy came over as well. And that was the year, I think, that they then started to build the Watch It Play team. Hey, there we go. And we had kind of spoken a couple of times just about, we sort of joked about whether it would be the Watch It Played convention, and we had a thing where, so, shut up and sit down conventions in Canada, and we thought it'd be quite funny if Watch It Played's convention was in the UK. but it's not at that point yet. It's not the Watch It Play convention. So how it is at the minute is kind of just a mutual partnership. There is no real financial exchange of money. It's just
Oh wow! I assumed
partnership where
that you would at least be covering the plane
cover their
costs.
costs and various other bits.
Okay, so the costs are covered, but that's it.
Oh yes, sorry. Yeah, we do cover all expenses and things.
And
Yeah,
if you
I
look,
mean, there's some other bits as well, but it's not like they're going to get a share of the tickets or anything like that.
Alex says, my first Airecon was a blast. Thanks, Mark, and everyone else who helped. And of course, on that photo, you can see that the team, even pre-pandemic, was continuing to grow. There's you in the middle. There's Jude on camp stage left. John Dodd and Dan, and that's Rick, right?
That's
on
Rick.
Jude's left.
Yeah, that's Rick, who's one of the. So there's 4 of us that are directors. So there's me, Ben, Rick, and Nabil. So Rick and Nabil were.
Ben is on the far right on the bottom, and I can't see Nabil.
I think he was probably driving a van at the time the photo was taken, unfortunately.
Sorry, Nabil. Yeah, there's photos available, but not everyone will be. And it's interesting because we've seen people grow. This is terrible. Is it Anna and Adam Adam with the little baby on the right, and then we've seen people grow up. I've seen some people who are super into In a Bind in 2016 and continue to grow up. And yeah, how do you enlist people? How do you get people involved to help out? And how do you decide who is doing what? Again, because I don't think we really nailed into that question.
So so when it first started, and it was just Ben and I, we had sort of very clear delineations, like that I would do all the events organization stuff, and Ben would do all of the kind of volunteer management and finance and that side of things. As we brought on Rick and Nabil, we split up a bit more, and then we already knew Anne, so we worked with Anne as well, and she's just really great with people and taking care of people. So we asked her if she would take on the role of the volunteer manager, which she did. She shared that with my mum at this most recent year because she went off to have a second baby. And yeah, it's just been a case of, as we've sort of brought volunteers on and we see what their particular skills are, we usually let people choose what they want to do. They tell us in their application form, these are the kinds of things I like to do, whether it's people-facing tasks or setup kind of stuff or things like that. And then we'll try and fit them in where is good for them. We will then, if we see someone or hear about someone that is doing particularly well in an area, we'll ask them whether they'd like to take on a bit more responsibility. So you saw in the picture there's a guy called Nick who we also used to work with at the charity. He is just a really good host and really good at kind of getting people energized. So we put him in charge of our events. We had Tim there, who again is very good at just being organized and sort of he's just very efficient. So he takes on our bring and buy. My mum always wanted to help, and she's so she came. I think her first one was Airecon, what is now Airecon 2, and she came along to volunteer at that, and as a joke put on a t-shirt, because every volunteer had a t-shirt with their name on it at that point rather than having a lanyard, and so hers said Mark's mum on it, and then that's just stuck, and loads of people now know her as Mark's mum. But she's like, well, I don't really know a lot about board games, I just like people and I want to help. And so we thought, well, what about the tuck shop? And so she's taken that on and made it her own. And I think it's really great to have that still at the size we are, have a place where people can go and get relatively cheap snacks and stuff without having to try and sneak food in or go and shove a whisper down the throat out the back or something. Just having those facilities on site, I think is great. And she's been a big driving force behind that. So I think it's just it's just asking people really, and seeing people who really are enjoying themselves and enjoying sort of serving in that kind of role. Trying not to push people too hard. It's always a challenge because there's so much to do, but just trying to make it an enjoyable experience for the people that do volunteer as well.
I mean, I think that's such a good approach. Getting people on, asking them, what do you want to do? Hey, Hubert, it says here that you like photography. Maybe you should be one of our official photographers. Hey, it looks like you're really extroverted. Maybe you should be going round and wrangling people. Hey, you're a bit anxious. Well, you do something where people are coming to you so you don't have to deal with quite so many people, maybe. I don't know,
Yeah,
there's
definitely.
all sorts of things. And so I think that you are, and I think obviously Anne and having a bunch of people who really care is the key thing. You mentioned
Yeah, there's.
food. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
I was going to say there's a really good. So at the charity, I used to have to read lots of like leadership and management type books and things like that. But there is one. A lot of them were awful, but some of them were really good. And one that is definitely worth reading if you're kind of looking at trying to manage people in any kind of form is something called Good to Great. And there's a principle in that as an organization, you are a kind of a bus. You want to get the right people on the bus, the wrong people off the bus. But when people are on the bus, is then about putting them in the right place. So the whole thing is sort of identifying people that definitely fit within the bus, but it's where is the best place for them. So you might have put them somewhere that they're not enjoying or is not really suitable for them. So it's like, well, rather than just kicking you off the bus, let's see if there's somewhere else that we can find that is good for you, and just really kind of playing to people's strengths. Because I think a lot of self-development, I think, concentrates on your weaknesses, and I think it's a lot about trying to get your weaknesses up to a point where then maybe not so much weaknesses, but they're still not going to be a strength. And instead it's like, well, can we look at what your strengths are and play to them and see if we can improve them? Because, you know, a 20% increase in this strength is going to be more impactful than a 20% increase in this weakness. If you know what I mean. Hopefully that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. You're better off, just focusing on your strengths, because those are the things that are actually going to draw people in. And those are the things that people want to see more of. Whereas your weaknesses, whilst it's good to improve on them, it can be so tempting. I do want to talk about food. I do want to say, yes, you've got some food at the event, and some of it is very good food. And you've got an actual application process. I understand there's a finite amount of space for people. I would say that on Friday and Sunday, as an exhibitor, it was absolutely fine. Going out, I could get some food. On Saturday, it's unavoidable. I went out and all the queues were way too long. I gave one of them money and I just said, can you just take this money and give me something and I'll be back in an hour and a half, because I need to basically run an event and I was hoping to eat within this half hour before the event, but I might not be able to. So I would at least like to have food once my event has finished. And then they were like, yeah, absolutely. And so I came back at 3 after my 2 p.m. event, and they had made me something very similar to this. But it just want to touch upon that, looking to the future. Am I right in thinking that this is a fixed limit? You're not going, or have you considered having additional food trucks? At what point would you do that? And also, what does the food application process look like?
So, I mean, I'll go in reverse order. So food application is quite easy. It's we will usually, a bit like we do with exhibitors, we'll usually open it up to previous caterers first if they want to come back and get a space. And then similar to how we did it with the venues, we just spent a long time going to lots of different things like food festivals, or if we heard that there was some event happening where they had a bunch of food trucks, we'd often go, not for the event, we'd still try and enjoy the event, but more it was about seeing the food trucks and going to them and speaking to them really and seeking them out, to the point where it's got to where we don't really need to do that anymore. Like I guess like a lot of things like board game publishers, there's like a little network of them, and if you think something is worthwhile, you'll probably talk to your other publisher friends. It was hard work trying all that food. But you would probably speak to your publisher friends and say, oh, hey, there's this really good thing going on. You should consider coming as well. And it's a bit the same with food trucks. So a lot of them actually all know each other, and they'll just say to their friends, oh, there's this thing going on. You should consider getting in touch. It's a worthwhile event. And so that's how a couple of them came in. Yeah. So and really the application process it's definitely not like really hard, and it's more just about getting a good balance between the different types of cuisine, making sure
I was really impressed how I think everything except for 1, maybe 2 stands had a vegan option. And, there are people who said that because they had multiple intolerances and allergies, that they just weren't able to eat anything that was offered, which is a bit sad. And I had heard some negative reviews of a couple of the things. Honestly, like one of them I was a bit disappointed by, which was the one that was the one that I picked on Saturday because it had the shortest queue. And so it was actually not as good. But I'm not going to name names because that feels a bit harsh, like out loud. But do you take those kinds of reviews into, oh, maybe we should have someone different, or maybe we should have someone who caters for even more allergies, like someone who has no gluten and no dairy and no nuts and all the things?
Yeah, I mean, it's always something we take into account. It's quite hard, I think, with the food truck model because it's not a professional kitchen. It's much harder to keep that. If someone has, say, like a peanut allergy, and that van serves peanuts, it's going to be harder to keep the peanuts out of certain dishes and cross-contamination and stuff. It's not that they can't do it. I think just when you're working in a confined space like that, it's a bit harder. So we definitely take all those, and we look at, like the surveys that we do every year. We do look through every single one of them. I saw a nice comment on Twitter where someone said, I don't like to do surveys, but I do like to do the Airecon one because I feel like I've put stuff in it before and they've listened and changes have been made. And so we definitely do look through them all and try and implement stuff. In terms of growing the food area, it's a tricky balance, and I suppose a bit like exhibitors, because it is quieter on Friday and Sunday. What we don't want is to grow it to a point where it's not worthwhile for them. And so for a lot of them, they would say, Saturday is obviously their busiest day and hugely busy, and it's nice having people coming back.
Honestly, it might be that the punters and certainly the exhibitors need to sort something else out, and it might be that as an exhibitor, frankly, I don't have the time to be away from my stand for that long to be standing in a queue. And,
so what we're looking at is hiring a bunch of those little table beeper things and just asking all of the food trucks to use them, so you don't have to stand and wait around for the food. You kind of order it and see whether any of them already have, because some of them have like online ordering systems. So you order it and you say, well, this time I want to pick it up and do it that way instead. So there's lots of ways we can improve it. I think again, some of it is just how much busier it was from last time. So these things weren't really a consideration last time, so we didn't have to worry too much. And it's all of a sudden a bit like with the flags that have been mentioned already. It was all of a sudden an issue this year when it wasn't at all last year. So last time, sorry.
Apparently, the hot dog guy had a little board game trivia game, which was fun. I did not see that.
Barney's great, and he's really into games himself. And so when he comes up to Airecon, he brings all his games with a bringer by to try and get some more to take home and play with his wife Flick.
There's a quick question: did you lose flags during the event, do you think?
Well, we actually found a bunch of them upstairs in Hall D. So they did come back downstairs. The biggest problem we have with flags, and we try and express this to people when they're taking the flag, is please bring it back. Because what often you'll find is people get so excited to start the game, they just lay it down on their table instead. So there's often they're in the room somewhere, but people just kind of forget to bring them back. So that'd be helpful. But we'll look into it next year and just try and get many more flags, 1 flag per person, maybe something like that.
And also a brighter color.
Yes.
So looking at I know it's the end of the hour. I don't know how if you are how pressed you are for time. It would be great to carry on a little bit longer. Let's talk about 2022. Giants games. This is always fantastic. I love the Giants. Hey, that's my fish. It's a spectacle, and it's actually slightly different. The raffle and the donate what you want for games that people might not be actually wanting, if you know what I mean,
Yeah.
might be overstocked. I was, considering just putting in like 5 copies of In a Bind Junior, like at a certain, because I do have a certain number that I'm not allowed to sell even.
Right.
The
Okay.
original In a Bind, I've got few enough that I'm kind of happy with how many I've got, and I could happily keep that. And then in 10 years' time, if I want, but In a Bind Junior, I'd happily donate some of them, or I'm probably going to end up donating them to schools. But yeah, how do you decide what to do? We've not really talked about the events. How do you decide what events to run? Obviously, there's people like Imagination Gaming and the Herefordshire gamers that need permanent space. There's people like me who just say, hey, I want to do this event. Can you do it? Do you have the space? Like the Wits and Wagers where we ran, where we actually had your mum getting everyone checking the survey that everyone had completed. And I think we used those same survey results the following year, just saying, yeah, these were the results from 2 years ago. And so how do you decide which events to run?
It's always tricky. So this was part of our partnership really with Watch It Played, was that they wanted to get more involved on the events side of things. So obviously we had an extra factor there in sort of taking into consideration what they were wanting to do as a team. But generally, it's a very basic thing of, is this going to be fun and will this add to the event? And if the answer is yes, we'll probably do it. We don't usually struggle. We don't usually have to turn down that many, unless it's. I think what I tend to look for is someone will say, "I've got this idea for an event. Can I run it?" And I will say, "Well, what do you need from us? And how far along in its planning are you?" Because sometimes it is just literally an idea. Like, I won't say who. Someone had an idea for.
Well, I've submitted stuff that's just been an idea. I submitted an idea for a musical board game themed concert, and you said no.
We got to the point where we said it wasn't developed far enough, but we would look at it in the future, I think. So it was a no for this time. So it was that kind of. And
also Elaine, from No Pun Included, kind of felt uncomfortable coming. So yeah.
Yeah, that's true. But there was someone else had an idea for like a celebrity death match, but it was like 2 players in a ring where they were playing 2-player games. I didn't really, and it was kind of like, actually, when you get down to what we need to do for this is quite an inordinate amount of work that's needed to actually make this event happen. So, because
in terms of how many people you need, what space do you need, is it actually going to be good? Like, if it's something where it's interesting, because some of the events that have run have been fairly small. The Yogi Stock Guru or In a Bond, I was genuinely worried that it might be like one person turning up. And I would have been a bit sad. I wanted to make sure that I had enough volunteers that even if only one person turned up, they would still have a reasonably okay time, if you know what I mean. And in the end, I think there were like 12 people. And the point is, like, 12 people isn't like massive by any scale of the imagination. And even the Ultimate Werewolf, it's still a relatively small percentage of the people who were at the convention at that time.
Yeah.
But it is adding to the convention for those people. So at some point, surely it becomes a cost benefit to say, hey, if we've got multiple things that we could do, is there something that would make even more people happier? And maybe you also have to think about how happy this is making people. Like, without wanting to blow my own trumpet too much, I do believe that everyone who turns up to Yogi Stock Guru had a really good time.
Yeah.
And but I do think that then is that worth running, or would you rather do something that you would definitely fill the room for, but I don't know, be slightly
I don't know.
less
I think
memorable?
it's always just good to have a mix, and try and make space for both. Like, we're lucky that we have the two different event spaces, so we do have that ability to put both kinds of events on. And there might be a time where we have to consider things like ticketing it. So someone's mentioned the quiz already, that we only just about squeezed everyone in the room. I think there's probably some people that didn't come in because they saw how busy it was. Things like the charity raffle, which was just crammed and ridiculously busy. So I think there'll be some things that are like staples that we'll just carry on doing every year. And then other bits that will just, so like we have we call them mega games. They're not properly mega games, but the big versions of games, that's only ever going to be 30, 40, 50 people. But they're really fun, and we can just switch them out quite easily. We build up a little stock. So number 9 took a year off this year, might come back in a couple of years. And so there's always something fresh as well there.
Back in the day, like Whitson's Wagers was a really nice thing to run. I think when we had the teams, that was going well.
Yeah. Really good.
We've got a random idea for something that's undeveloped, a lanyard that can transform into a flag, but apparently can almost do that. Stick the gamer available, stick around, wave it like a flag. Vivan says the events were great for those who came alone. Absolutely. I know when I went to my first convention, I think it was 2011. It's relatively recently. I went to UK Games Expo as a volunteer. Lovely way to meet people, but then during my time off, I was all about the events. Yes, I wandered around. I had a demo of literally everything that looked like it was short enough to have a quick go of. But yeah, all the events about, hey, this is what miniatures games are. I've got not much interest in miniatures games, but yeah, I'm interested to hear someone talk about them for an hour and hearing like people talk about stuff. Vivan says, I made a friend at Werewolf, which made the whole of Airecon more enjoyable. And Jeff Ross, thank you for joining us, says, you do really look after the volunteers. The IT systems in place make the different roles simple and intuitive.
It's good to hear. Great.
So there you go. And I'm going to now, we've run out of pictures from the first 3 years, so I'm now going to show the pictures that my helpers took. Some of these are mainly at my stand. This is a game about quickly grabbing creatures that are totally different and counting your. Look, there's a mixture of it's only beetroots in this version. So, yeah, let's actually talk about COVID and masks and everything, because there were rules in place that once everyone was sat down, everyone was playing a certain game, you could take off your masks if everyone agreed, but you had to check in with everyone. And I did notice on the Sunday a few people had taken off their masks. It was becoming problematic to talk. I think people started feeling tired about that. But how did you feel about the whole thing? Do you feel, I mean, we have had reports of some people getting COVID after the event. How do you feel the whole thing went?
I think, it's really tough kind of situation to go through. We want to just put on a fun event for people and don't want to have to consider pandemic measures and various things like that. But it's something that we did have to do this time around. I think one of the big challenges is finding the balance where it's not, the measures aren't discriminatory, and they're not hindering people too much having a good time. So like you said, obviously by the end of, as people were getting tired, it was becoming quite hard sometimes to hear people and things like that. When we decided on our measures, which was mostly the COVID pass and then the masks as you were walking around, that was the government guidelines at the time. And that's what they said. And it said that they wouldn't change until the end of March. that was brought forward for various reasons that we probably shouldn't go into because of political opinion, but they did bring that forward. And they brought it forward at quite short notice, and so it was actually the week or the 2 weeks before Airecon that they changed and dropped all of those guidelines completely. We didn't think it was fair on people that had bought their tickets at the time when that was our policy to suddenly change it so close to the event, especially because while we're happy to give, well, we're not happy, but we will freely give refunds to anybody that says I want a refund without a reason. But people might have at that point got locked into accommodation or travel that they wouldn't have been able to as easily get a refund from. So we didn't think it was fair to change suddenly. Some people were upset about that. We got quite a few emails from people saying that we were being too strict. That we were, that we were.
I think you need to make a decision at a certain point. Either you're going to be too strict for some, or you're going to be not strict enough for some. And I think
it's somewhere in the middle. I know when you had Alan on, he was kind of talking a bit about not because we didn't insist on a lateral flow test, and part of that decision was that because it was becoming much harder at the time to actually get lateral flow tests freely, like, you know, because they've started to wind down that whole program, a lot of people just couldn't get them at all. And so, but there is still one way of getting the COVID pass, is you submit a negative COVID test and you'll get a COVID pass for 48 hours, I think. So that is still available for people that wanted to do it. But we just found with what we wanted to do is try and make those door entry times and stuff very smooth for everyone attending. So if you have lots of multiple ways of showing, oh, I have this test, or I have, you know, because I know at other events where people have just shown a picture of a negative test and been allowed in and things like that, which I wasn't as comfortable, or as a team we weren't as comfortable with.
You want to actually scan
yeah, obviously there's been... So we scanned it, and it's the same if you did you go to Essen?
I've not been to Essen since 2019.
All right, so that's how it was at Essen, that everyone, every time you came in and out, was scanned, and it was super simple. Your NHS pass worked over in Germany. It was totally fine, and so that's what we were kind of going with. But I think here the pass kind of system didn't really take off as much. I think we had confusion with two different passes, whereas, you know, I went to Belgium before Christmas, and even just to get into a bar you had to have a pass scanned before you could sit down or anything, and it was just the norm. It's just everywhere you went it was beep beep beep. So that was part of it. Obviously, like I said, a few people have reported that they've then tested positive for COVID. I think part of that was probably inevitable when you look at the numbers. We're not obviously in the news, it's not focusing as much on numbers and how many people have COVID and stuff like that at the minute, but there are certain reports that I've seen that's saying it's somewhere in the region of 1 to 2 million people every week getting it now. You know, a couple of 100,000 people every day testing positive.
Wow.
You know, around the time of at the time, just shortly after Airecon, it was thought that 1 in 20 people in the UK had COVID. Now it's 1 in 16, I think was the latest report. By that, oh yeah, Jeff Ross. So the thing with the Scottish COVID one is that you had to put it on the travel. You had to pretend you were travelling for some reason. So the domestic Scottish pass didn't work in England and Wales. They had to say they were travelling.
It's ridiculous how there is such a divide in the government. I mean, we're meant to be one country. This should not be difficult. Yet it is.
Yeah, so it's all, you know, it's all something it's the first time we'd ever had to do it. There hadn't been that many other similar events in the last couple of years that we could look to and say, well, that worked really well, or this worked really well. I know some had the wristband things, but often people don't really like them. And one event I went to, I was able to just walk past everyone doing the checks and just take one without anyone checking anything. So I think everyone's just sort of feeling their way with this sort of stuff, and hopefully we won't have to deal with it again anytime soon. But
I mean, who knows what the next year will have. But I think before we wrap up, there are some questions that I said I would ask, and I feel like I should make sure that they have all been asked. So yeah, events. What are some other background details that people might not know?
About Airecon, or just about me?
Yes. About Airecon
Yeah.
specifically. I mean, we can talk all about. I mean, we've already talked all about you for an hour. Like, we're focusing more on Airecon.
Sure. I think probably one thing that some people are surprised about is that we are still all volunteers, that we don't get paid to do Airecon. We do get quite a lot of income as Airecon as a company, but our costs are just so high that there's never really enough left for us to take
So there's a
anything
gross
from it.
income, but not necessarily a net.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, but it looks like it might change. We're looking at whether I might actually start being employed by Airecon for a day a week in the next couple of months. So
Amazing.
and then we want to do so with that. We want to concentrate more on some external events. We want to try and make it like a real kind of community event, as in the wider community of Harrogate and the town there, and sort of running some external events at various different venues around the city. So not just in the convention centre itself.
Yeah, he was talking to Nabil, who was pointing out that because people are sitting down and playing games, because that is such a big part of the focus, as opposed to UK Games Expo, where people are wandering around, there's actually not necessarily a growth of income with that outraces the growth of people, if you know what I mean, in the way that UK Games X, because there comes a tipping point with other conventions where they start to become profitable. But because of the way that Airecon is, that may or may not happen. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah,
like, is it
it's
just one of
always
these
hard to
wait and
predict.
see,
So
who
I
knows
guess
kind
what
of things?
Yeah,
You
like I
can
said,
refuse to
we're
answer
all
these
still
questions,
doing
by the
voluntary.
way.
That's fine. Because we're voluntary, we don't rely on Airecon for a salary or for income, so we are able to wait a bit longer with this. It would be obviously be nice if there was some compensation, but it's not a need, and so we can wait a bit longer. How we try and structure it is the prices that we charge for our exhibitors is if that was an open gaming table with 6 people, we would get roughly the same income. So for us, there really is there's not really much disparity between gaming space and exhibitor space. And what we've always tried to do as well is we don't try and kind of cut deals or try and convince people to come as certainly as exhibitors. Everyone pays the same price, and I know that's not always the case. And we want to just try
I've
and be open
heard
and honest with
stories
people.
of other conventions where closer to the convention they slash the prices, and like if you are an exhibitor who'd already booked, you felt, well, what was the point of me booking early? Frankly, to heck with you. That's not fair at all. I paid my money early, I gave you my money, and I committed to this, and now you're charging other people less. What's that all about? Yeah.
Yeah, it's tough, and it is always a challenge and balancing that. We don't want people to feel ripped off. We want everyone, including the exhibitors, to have an amazing time and feel like it was worthwhile. I think you've said a couple of times you're really just looking to cover your costs at something like that. I know Richard from Medusa has that kind of attitude where he sees conventions as marketing. So if he can come out the other side of a convention and be cost neutral, which I think he said he was for Airecon, but then he's had all the marketing that goes with it, then for him that's a good benefit. So I think there's a balance of, over the years, the larger you grow, and I wonder if this is why we don't see many conventions between the sizes of Airecon, Tabletop Scotland, that kind of size, and Games Expo. There's really, in the world, there's not really much in between there. So you have all of these kind of ones. So in America, you're looking at things like BGG, Dice Tower, various conventions, that sort of size. Then there's nothing, so they're about 3,000 to 4,000. Then there's nothing really up until you get to things like PAX Unplugged or Tokyo Games Market, UK Games Expo, where you're kind of in the 20,000s. So there's a real kind of weird gulf, and I think what it probably is the amount of work needed to make an event of that size goes beyond being able to just do it on a voluntary basis. But at some point, there is a sort of a switch as what you can almost charge per exhibitor, per ticket, whatever goes up, but the cost per person goes down, and at some point you kind of almost suddenly you're in a profit-making position, I suppose.
It's a bit weird because, like, also I mentioned this, I don't know if you watched the VOD of my shows where I talked about Airecon in the past few weeks since it was on, where I said that for me, frankly, sponsoring the Bring and Buy may not have been the best financial decision. I kind of lump it under my whimsy budgets where I say, okay, I've got a certain amount. Thought this might be my last ever Airecon. Probably next year is going to be my last ever Airecon, realistically speaking. When I emigrate, I'm going to come back like maybe one time a year, and it's going to be UK Games Expo, obviously, like with all due respect. But I feel like it's weird because my games are quick, fast to play, and they kind of bring people in. I think that when you see people contorting, when you see people quickly grabbing things, when you hear people shouting, like Alex calls it, wee whimsical marketing, and it promotes itself. And then I'm like, if someone else starts giving away catalogs and it's a little picture of a cat on a log, I'll be a bit annoyed because you've stolen my pun. But they're like, oh, that's really cool. Like, you say, hey, would you like a catalog? And they're like, oh, I was expecting a catalog and it's a little sticker with a cat on a log. And, you know, these kinds of things that delight people. Some people will walk past, but these are deliberately cheap stickers. They're relatively small. They're not like semi-transparent or anything, but they still cost me a few pennies each. But that is a much better marketing expense for me, and having more volunteers if I'm really thinking about the financials. Whereas, sure, maybe in years to come, people will still remember potentially the cat gallery, or which at UK Games Expo I actually had to pay hundreds of pounds to have that backing wall, to have somewhere to put it up. And it was like, I do this? Well, that's where the whimsy budget kind of developed. I said, it's probably not great marketing, but I will not count that. I'll just... And how do you know the long-term payoff of something? You can't. So you've just got to do with what you believe in. And I personally, Bring and Buy, it's a really cool thing that everyone wants to do it. But it feels like it's maybe not the best fit for me. But yeah, as a publisher, if you do have a bit more cash flow, if you've got a bit more of a budget, if you're working on games that are more expensive, if you're working on games where your challenge is bringing in some people into something that doesn't look as exciting and visceral from when you see it from 10 meters away, then yeah, I think that these kinds of sponsorship deals are brilliant. And presumably for a traveling man, being a major sponsor each year and being involved in this is continuing to raise their profile generally, because Airecon is continuing to grow. Do you have anything to say about sponsorships and stuff?
Yes, I mean it's always a nice thing to have. I think we try not to rely on sponsorships for income, but we always then, if we do get sponsorship, we always try and funnel that money into making that thing better. So, for instance, your sponsorship of the Bring and Buy allowed us to do more work on the app and improve the app a bit more, and we're going to plan to do more for next year with that money. So, and I think it's just that thing of repeated, like, oh, you see this name again, or this thing again, or this company again, and just raises a profile. If someone says like, oh, what's a UK publisher, people might think of Stuff by Bez because they've seen it at various things, and you do stand out when you're at a convention, and that'll stick in people's minds. So, and for Traveling Man, it's a very kind of mutual relationship there. Like, they've done a lot to promote Airecon, we will do a lot to promote them, and shout about them, because we think they're brilliant. As that it's the reason probably that both Ben and I got so into gaming, was because we had a really excellent game store local to us, and with really friendly and enthusiastic staff, and so that's why we're happy with that kind of partnership, is that a lot of their goals are very similar to our goals, and so it works well. I think It is very, I think someone said there, it's very difficult to measure the return on sponsorship. But I think if you do it, and so a good example is something like Red Bull, who, if you think of any kind of extreme sport, you almost instantly relate them to Red Bull because they've done so much sponsorship and they've just been very clever in that way.
And it's like
And
the
it just
escape rooms, like
gets the name on it.
Shannon and Dr. Scott, Board Games with Scott, I can't remember their surname.
Oh, yeah.
I
know who you mean.
Board Games with Scott.
Yeah.
Anyway, so Scott Nicholson, that's the one. Scott Nicholson. So yes. Scott Nicholson is, making this big event. It's a really big escape room event. And of course, Red Bull right in there, because it's not just for your body, it's also for your mind, all the caffeine, apparently. We've already talked about having space for the exhibitors, unless there's anything that you want to add, because this is something that's come up before, like in previous years, that you've been thinking about having to decide. And this year, was it just a case of the last people to apply didn't get the space? Was it just first come, first served?
Almost. When we kind of got down to those last few decisions, it was the type of space people were looking for and what was available. So it was kind of, and as if a space, so we did have a couple of dropouts close to the event. So it meant if a space opened up, we just went to those people that had requested something very similar, so we could just slot them in. We didn't have to kind of go back and forth and say, well, if you did this, you might be able to fit into this space. So some of it in those last few weeks get very, very busy, and so we just sometimes have to take a bit of an easier option, which is not what we like to do. What we're looking at next year is, it's not final yet, but we're looking at moving to the other end of the convention centre. So the halls are not actually bigger. So the big hall that we currently use is the biggest hall that they have. But at the other end, I would say they're a bit more usable because they don't have silly pillars everywhere and lift shafts and things like that. So they feel a bit bigger, even though they're all roughly half the size of that one that we use already. But what will, because they're just big square open spaces. They're definitely not as nice. Like, I'm going to try and make sure that gets out there as much as I can, that they're not as pleasant as Hall D. They're not carpeted.
Hall D is the one with the windows all along one side, right?
Yeah, which is probably the nicest hall that they have, but it's definitely not big enough to hold a whole convention anymore, even though that's where it was the first year we went there. So what we're looking at more is having a dedicated exhibitor hall, which would be, everyone would have to walk through as you come through. You might have seen at the end of the convention centre, it's got big pillars. And so that would be our main entrance. And you kind of go through there, you walk straight into the exhibitor hall, and then there's a couple of other halls kind of around it that we'd use, but they all connect to each other. And what that allows us to do means we don't have to put those barriers around the exhibitor areas in the evening. We can just close down that whole hall and open up a different entrance, and people can just go in and out of the gaming areas instead. Oh, wow. We're just trying to sort it all out with the convention centre now. Because we do really like the halls that we've used in the past couple of years, but it feels like we do need to grow a bit again. And unfortunately, there's not a lot of easy space to grow into at that end. Like, you end up having to, like, even at the minute, Hall D is sometimes a little bit hard to find. These other halls are then past Hall D, where you've got to go up like another staircase and round a corner and across a bridge and things like that. So it just I think the way that the convention centre has been built over the years, and they've sort of just added stuff on, it makes it a bit fiddlier. Whereas at this end, we can grow a bit, and then we might go back into the other side once we've figured out how we project. Yeah,
there's something charming about having lots of little bits, and at one extreme end of the scale, you've got the compulsion in Edinburgh, which is literally the student halls, and so you've got this windy spiral staircase. You've got, maybe, I want to say, like 3 levels, and you have to, nothing's particularly far from one another, but you definitely have to know where you're going. And the first year you go, you can absolutely get lost unless you spend like 1 hour just wandering around and say, okay, that's where the talk rooms are, that's where people are playing games, that's where people are playing the other kind of games, that's where the paid stuff is. Okay, and it is always nice when it's just a big square Do you know what I
Mhm.
mean? And
Yeah, and I think
we can
it's
just
a nice
wander up and
U.
down.
Yeah, so it'll end up being a bit of like a horseshoe kind of U shape if we go with the 4 halls that we're looking at, and the 2 entrances would be so you can actually just walk around in a circle because you could go out of one entrance and go back in the other. So it's a nice
Nice.
circular layout.
Do you have anything else to say about? Well, firstly, how many people would it take to outgrow Harrogate's Convention Centre?
We try to do the maths. It's quite tricky because they do have quite a lot of hidden halls as well. So so the ones we're talking about, they actually have 2 underground halls there as well. So but they just tend not to use them. But I'm sure if we got big enough at some point, we might be like, oh, can we have those as well? We think it's around 10 to 12,000.
Oh wow!
So there's still plenty of space, but there's lots of other usable space around the convention centre as well. So, you know, the Crown Plaza has their own, a bit like the Hilton for the Games Expo. The Crown Plaza has their own event spaces that you could use. There's a huge event space just outside of Harrogate called the Yorkshire Event Centre, which is, you know, like if we did want to stay there and keep growing. I don't know that we would. I think at some point we'll probably get to a point and think, well, that's big enough now. We'll just stay at that level rather than just endless growth. Yeah, I think.
I mean, would you because surely the idea of saying our tickets are actually going to run out, because I know that that's actually what turned Frank West, City of Games, Isle of Cats away from running the conventions, because they could obviously it was a much smaller scale, like we're talking 200 people, but when it got to the point within the second, let alone the third year, where Frank was having to say, actually, I'm having to turn away so many people, I feel like I'm bringing about disappointment, it's actually really sad, and I don't want to keep doing this. I did this basically for a bit of fun, and now I'm having to turn away people. Wouldn't you feel sad about if there's like twice as many people that want to come that are actually able to get in?
Yeah, I mean, we would. I think the difference probably there is scale. Like, you know, like having to turn away a few hundred people when your event is a few hundred is very different to having to turn away a few hundred people if your event is a couple of thousand people.
Alex says, start running the tickets on a Dutch auction.
Yeah. Well, we could do it as a massive event for like on the day. You just have to come outside of the event centre. We're going to sell so many tickets. Everybody else just has to go home. But what we talked about for us as a team is like, whilst we see the numbers going up as a sign of success in terms of that we're doing something right, it's not something that we're focused on, and it's not something we're chasing in terms of just, you know, just endless growth. And for us, it is more that kind of community side and that keeping that that kind of welcoming spirit alive is more important for us. And we've always said that if we ever felt that was starting to slip away, or, you know, the surveys that we were getting back were not as positive, that's more what we're concentrating on.
Don't you think that you could have that same spirit even if you were at the scale of UK Games Expo?
I think you could, yeah. But I think it's not something that you can predict as easily as numbers of attendees. So I think it's just we have to go each year and sort of say, well, how did it feel this year as a team?
So if in 10 years' time it does end up outgrowing this, or even if in 4 years' time you're just like, okay, that's a problem for future Mark and everyone.
Yeah, it's more that we're still going year to year and seeing how it goes, rather than trying to plan 5 or 10 years ahead. I'm sure Ben would like us to be planning 5 or 10 years ahead for his spreadsheets, but it's
penultimate question. How does everyone else feel about you being the one that everyone recognizes? Because everyone else does lots of work, right? I mean, I showed the cards and everyone knew, well, I would say 70% of people who got given a card, my special Airecon promo card, I don't have one to hand, knew, oh, that's Mark. Whereas everyone, oh, who's Ben? And then I actually had to point out Ben, and then they were, oh, that's Ben. Okay.
Yeah, I think in general they're fine. You know, anytime an opportunity comes up. So we had Radio York were there one morning, and they wanted to do like multiple shows over the morning, and I think people are just happy for me to just do it we try and where we can, like obviously talk about that it is a team effort and it's not just me, but it's.
I mean, it makes sense. You kind of do need one spokesperson for the stuff to some extent.
To go back to sort of like Stonemaier Games, I don't know that many people would recognise. Is it
Alan Stone? Yes.
Yeah. But I'm sure he does just as much work as Jamie. It's just Jamie is maybe more comfortable talking.
I think it's like, from what I understand, it's a 60-40 split, like very deliberately. But like many people don't even understand that Alan Stone exists, which is quite sad.
Yeah, and even to the point, I'm sure some people think that Jamie's surname is Stonemaier rather than Stegmaier. The Stone comes from the other partner. So
yeah. And thanks for listening, J Foolsguard, who says, I'm planning to come over next year. Hopefully that you'll be just in time to see my final thing. I wanted to ask you, what are some things that would be changing for 2023? And can I pitch you my events now?
Sure, go for it.
Okay, so my first idea is to redo In a Bond, but with even crazier things. So we're mixing In a Giant Bind, or In a Big Bind, whatever that was called, from 2016, with In a Bond. It's going to be like the craziest thing that I can make whilst hopefully adhering to health and safety.
Sounds good. Let's book it in.
Okay, awesome. Is that it done?
Yeah. Well, as always, I'll probably ask for a follow-up email to remind me.
Okay. Next thing, and even if Elaine isn't up for doing this, I really want to do it. An entire concert, like I'm thinking like a 20-30 minute performance, because to be honest, more than that would probably be too challenging. But it's going to be a sort of rock opera based around the design of a board game, with music played on keyboard. And Alex, if you want to join in, it would be lovely to have you perform this. I'm soliciting your input. So this is like, it hasn't been written or anything. What do you think of that?
Yeah, as I said last time, I think I'm up for it, and I think if we can get it a bit more pinned down as to what it would be, and you know what you're doing.
Okay, so we need to get it done like probably over the summer. So Alex and I need to kind of, talk about, what, and are events allowed to be like relatively short things? Like if it's like, okay, we've got half an hour of material and we've got, because of timing, I guess we'd have the room for an hour, but then after that, everyone just balls around or does something else after it finishes.
Yeah. I mean, it could be one of these things that we look to do it as an off-site if there's more of a gig venue. Maybe we could actually get a few acts in and you do it as a whole event. Who knows?
Yeah, I could be the what's the warm-up for Jolly Boat.
Yeah, why not?
Yeah, I mean, why just have the one band? I mean, why have Jolly Boats having all the stuff? Okay, the next thing I wanted to suggest is an improv comedy show done, getting the losers, and that's I'm just kind of trying to improvise ideas now.
Yeah, so we've spoke to Dave a couple of times about him doing something and he's always wanted to do it, and we've said, let's get it booked. The problem he has is his actual, because he does that as a job, his theatre job is booked so far in advance. He's not always sure whether he can make Airecon or not, and the last 2 times have been very last minute. It's like, oh, I'm actually coming now. So yeah, I mean, he's up for it. If we know that he's not got a show on, I'm sure he would be willing to give it a go. And do you know, so we have do you know Chris Campbell?
Chris Campbell, I don't.
So he does a lot of our social media when the event's on. So I usually do it outside of when the event's on, but I hand it over to him for the couple of weeks around the event because it's it's a bit too busy. But he's really into improv as well. So he might
okay, and the final thing that I seriously want to suggest, I'm not sure which of the LDEC games it would be, but I think that there should definitely, I would really like to do one mega game that is like a multiplayer solitaire thing, maybe Micro Muckle, or maybe the original Muckle. Although Muckle is a bit a little bit more complex, and I think that because that game takes normally about 25 minutes, the one that I invented over lockdown, Mini Muckle, might be the best one, because that takes literally about 10 minutes, and then you can be like, okay, it normally takes 10 minutes, we're going to have a bit of jokes in between, and we're going to do some potentially improvised jokes, mix it up, and then that will take about 25 minutes, and we'll play it twice.
Yeah,
I mean,
there's lots of
giant
things you
word
can do
game.
with. Yeah, lots of things you can do with that. So where if we had it more like maybe the Watch It Play team, and it was people on stage playing it, and you did it that way rather than the big participation thing, or you do it as a big participation thing, because we have lots of those kind of things already. But Mega Mini Muckle sounds great.
Yes, Mega Mini Muckle. That's exactly what it would be called. So that is there anything else that you want to say about 2023, about the future of Airecon, or anything that we'd like to say to people who are watching?
I mean, generally, we're still always blown away every year that people keep coming back and enjoying themselves, and we're so grateful for everyone, from exhibitors to volunteers to attendees, for the support. And I think the fact that we still do have that community vibe and that friendly and welcoming atmosphere. Obviously, we talked about some challenges earlier around that, but I think that's down to everyone. It's not just us saying do this. I think it's everybody comes with that spirit and comes with that attitude, and so we're just really appreciative of that, and that so many people choose to buy into it.
To give you the due respect, I think that a lot of these things are about communicating, and the Good to Great book that you mentioned, getting people on the right seats on the bus. But it has been a lovely chat, and at this point I would like to turn it around, asking a question. Do you have a question for all our audience, or shall I ask the question of the day? Question of the day, it's a little question for you before you go on your way. Question of the day.
I'm going to ask, what is your preferred name for your stack or pile of unplayed games?
Oh, so you like Pile of Potential, which I like,
love
because
Pile
then
of Potential.
pop. And some people call it the Shelf of Shame, and also Pile of Potential keeps that alliteration, but it's like, why are we ashamed? It's just like, I mean, sure, maybe if it stays there for 10 years and then you never play it, maybe that's a bit sad, but don't feel shame about it.
No, it's supposed to be an enjoyable hobby.
Yeah.
No,
I mean, that's the thing about playing games. I was playing with someone on Sunday, and then we were playing Parks, and then there was this maybe 10-year-old who was playing with us, and then the dad said, and she said, oh, can I go? And the person teaching the game was just about to say, oh, if we just drop out this tile and go down to 3 players, it won't matter. And then the dad said, oh, if you start a game, you need to finish the game. And I don't know, like, I'm not a parent, but Alex calls it the games in waiting. I think I like this because, again, there's no shame. I think that you should associate the hobby with enjoyment, not being forced to do something that you don't want to do. And frankly, if you buy a game and then you open it up and you read the rules and you realize, hey, wait a minute, this isn't a game for me, I think it's totally okay to judge a game based on 0 plays. That's my personal hot take. I don't know if you would agree or disagree, Mark.
I definitely agree, because I've done it. So, I think some things, games are quite hard.
Yeah, I should have bought beer instead, Pile.
Yeah, maybe. That definitely doesn't. My pile of potential of games is definitely bigger than my pile of potential of beer. I think I've done that. I think sometimes it's just really hard to tell, even if you do all your research on BGG and watch videos, until you actually get down and get into the meat of a game. Sometimes you don't know. And there's plenty of games where I thought I would really enjoy them and haven't. Equally, there's been some games where I was like a bit lukewarm on it and actually really ended up enjoying it. So it's fine.
Hal calls it the bench, waiting to be brought in when another game needs a rest. Get some fresh legs. I like that. And so, over to you. What are you up to? You can share, but only if you want to. Is there anything that you want to share? I promise that's a care. Anything you have to do? Anything that you want to do? Anything that you are dreading doing? I mean, I'm actually now feeling I'm probably going to have a quick not maybe a run, but like at least a quick power walk, just through the park. It isn't raining, which is good. There's no sun, by which I mean there is actually sun. I mean, the sun's rays are technically here, but the sky, I cannot see any blue at all here.
No, pretty cloudy here as well. Yeah.
But I will be going out for a quick walk. Then I will be writing an RPG that I have to finish a first draft of by Thursday, basically. And that's what I'm going to be mainly focusing on. And maybe doing some colouring in, but just that RPG, that one thing is a big enough task. It is like a multiple day long task. What are you up to, Mark?
Well, I've got some work to do. So my day job with PSC. I've got that for the rest of the day. I was chatting to Ian McAllister, the Giant Brain, on Discord tonight, which should be fun. And then at some point, I've got to clear a couple of tons of gravel out my garden. That's what I'm up to. It's probably the thing I'm dreading.
Yeah, I saw that 8 p.m. UK time today. If people want to watch Mark talk a bit more with someone totally different, you can check that out. And one thing that was asked that I didn't ask, hopefully this will be quick. How much do you have to worry about PSC or Bright Eye during the convention? Did you check in on them at all, or did you're doing your own thing?
PSC not so much, because PSC been around for a few years and done a lot of conventions and had been to Airecon last time as well, so kind of ran itself a bit more. Bright Eye being new and the first we were at Essen, but the first kind of convention like that they've been to, I was there a bit more involved, certainly in the planning, maybe not so much during the actual weekend, but yeah, it's all good.
Well, it sounds like you've got it all down to a machine. Hello, Yoda. We are just finishing up. Let me know what you're up to if you want. J Fool's Guards preparing for some play tests and also dreading to do some admin stuff. I understand that. There's a book called Swallow That Frog or Eat That Frog, where it just says, do the difficult thing, and then sometimes getting started. Also, the other trick is to sometimes say, I'm going to do it for at least 5 minutes, then I can have a break. So 5 minutes is short enough that it won't seem as daunting, and maybe you need a break, maybe you don't, but let yourself have a break if you want it, and then hopefully the next time you come back to it, it'll be easier to continue. Alex says, I'm speed crafting puzzles today. That sounds delightful. And that, unless anyone else has anything more to say, that is the end of the show. To recap and wrap up before we finish up, we talked about a lot of different ideas for conventions. It's emerged that a lot of the ideas, you might want to check out health and safety if people are bringing their own chairs or if people are getting, but yeah, potentially also the costs of the professional hairdressers might be a bit of a barrier. But otherwise, let's go with all of the conventions. Let's have more conventions. We talked about the background of Airecon. We talked about how it started off from Hindu, and you've got this flat entirely to yourself for a while. And what are you going to do? Let's do a convention, coming up with a pun, coming up with little things for people to sign, coming up with an actual schedule. And there's people from that first convention who are still coming every year, not just yourself, but other people as well. And then you're like, oh, this was fun. Well, it's only £100 to book this fairly nice place where we can have like 200 people. Let's do this in Bradford. And so you went ahead with it. But then this little weird thing that was never running on the Sunday, which is a bit weird for a convention, and then saying, okay, Travelling Man getting together, doing the thing, Rodney Smith, hey, do you want to come over? Hey, I'd like to. Conversation went well, came over, covering the costs, and then Rodney just having fun and making it a mutually beneficial thing where you get people coming over because they've heard of Rodney Smith and whatever, and they get a bit of, I guess, the joy of being there with the fans and the fun of, again, reminding people that they exist, because even Coca-Cola, which exists, and, they're the first brand that came to my mind, so good on them, maybe because of the red, I don't know. But even when something exists, having it labelled on a big billboard does still increase the possibility that you'll buy from it or engage with it or whatever. But then we talked about letting people grow into the roles that they are, making sure that people tell you what they want to do, making sure you give them tasks that are suitable for them, getting them on the right places of the bus. We decided, you heard it here first, that there is going to be a repeat of In a Bond / Yogi Stock Guru next year, but it will be even crazier. And I'm committing myself to drawing some, like, the craziest things that I can think of. We might need some specific props. So these cards might be for specific, objects. Like there might be food involved. I don't know. Like I'll have to kind of, I guess I'll have to learn. Like, is it safe to get people to eat food? Is that wrong? I guess then I'd have to think about allergies and stuff. Like if they had Tic Tacs, like maybe they could have, like whenever you draw a card, eat a Tic Tac.
Or eat the card. Fastest to eat the card. Make it out of that edible paper.
Oh, edible paper. Oh, if we could get a cake. And if the cake definitely... But I could also screen the people who are playing. So I could make sure that the cards... And if at least one person... And if it's only teams this time, so if each company, it was like, okay, this time I feel like there's going to be enough people and we're only going to go for teams rather than each company being one person. Because this time, I don't know if you heard, but I think Mill and Kim Joy ended up merging a company, and they were like, are we allowed to merge a company? And I was like, yeah, sure, that sounds fun, let's do it. And so I made up rules for it. And so it feels like maybe we just start off with teams right at the start, or we have some merger rules so that if you can't do a thing, then you can merge whenever you want, but have that in there. It's going to be even more chaotic. But yes, and we decided there is going to be a concert that Alex and I have to, brainstorm for sometime, maybe UK Games Expo, Alex. If you are there, we can spend a bit of time on the Monday, if you are able to take time off work. And Mega Mini Muckle, we decided that that's also going to happen. But there will be other people who are not me at the show as well. There will probably be the Watch It Play team. There will probably be a lot more space. There will probably be a lot more exhibitors that weren't there. And it will continue to grow. So it's a great show. And yeah, I encourage people to go along. That is the recap and wrap up. If you want to check me out, I am, of course, Stuff by Bez everywhere. And if you want to check out my future streams, there it tells you about what my future streams are going to be. Tomorrow I'm going to be chatting with Jess Medringham about Kickstarter's finishing. Thursday I might actually just talk about my role-playing game, because that will be the deadline that I've got for that day. And then I'm going to go to Now Play This Design Camp. So that will be the bulk of what I'm talking about over the next week. Share, spread the word. And if you want to check out the person beside me who you can look upon, who is called Mark Cooke, then where would you like to be found, Mark Cooke?
Airecon UK is probably the easiest place. We also have PSC Games, Bright Eye Games, Zapato Brewing still, if you want to get some tasty beer. But lots of places.
And it's like, not to put you in an awkward position, but you love all your employees and you love all your employers.
Yeah,
that's
definitely
the kind of vibe that I get from you. You're a very happy person.
Generally, yeah.
Excellent. I mean, you look like you're enjoying life, and that's really good to see. So please share, spread the word. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, for all the questions. Van, J Fool's Guard, Alex, Yoda, thanks for popping in at the end. Hal, Jeff Ross, if Simon Brass, who kind of said that they just really enjoyed it. And thank you, everyone, for popping in. And also, most importantly, thank you, Mark.
Thank you.
I am going to do... Yeah. I feel like this is a weird thing, like Twitch etiquette. Once you've got a certain number of people, you should kind of raid. But in reality, because I want to get out of the house, then do I raid? And then kind of just say, okay, I'm going off and then running around, or yeah. You know what? We will check to see, and I'll stay for one song. And there, Idol Michael is streaming, so let's check out Idol Michael, who was also at the convention. If you know Michael, I assume that you know everyone.
Yeah, I know Michael.
And So for now, if you want to join the raid, then please do so. Otherwise, there is only one thing left to say, and that last thing is, of course, bye, 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 bye. This is a goodbye song. Bye, 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 bye. Thank you for watching long. Bye, 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 bye. This is the end of the show. Bye, 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 bye. And now it's time to go. Bye, 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 bye. This is a goodbye song. Bye, 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 bye. Thank you for watching long. Bye, 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 bye. This is the end of the show. Bye, 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 bye. And now it's time to go. Bye, bye, Alex.
Bye.
Bye, bye, Mark.
Bye.
Bye bye, Hal. Bye bye, everyone.